You are on an airplane flying over the Andes Mountains, thousands of feet in altitude. It goes into a steep dive and crashes into the snow-covered peaks, miles away from civilization, with freezing temperatures, little food, and no way to contact the outside world. What would you do? How would you survive? Today, let's discuss one of the most inspiring survival stories coming from aviation history, a story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. October 13th, 1972 is dated as the takeoff time of a Fairchild FH-227D aircraft out from Montevideo, Uruguay. It belonged to the Uruguayan Air Force, which had chartered it by the crew for 45 passengers who happened to be friends and family of several of the members of a rugby team and the team to Santiago, Chile, so it could be entertained to watch the home team play in an exhibition rugby match. However, very few knew what was ahead into calamity. The flight had entered the worst turbulence and bad weather that existed around the Andes Mountains. The pilots still continued flying under such conditions but misjudged their position within the mountain range. This would lead to one of the most astonishing survival stories ever recorded. It hit the mountain ridge at about 3:30 p.m. It raked off wings and a tail from the fuselage of the aircraft that crashed to a remote snow-covered slope. Of the 45 on board, 12 were killed outright. Many more were doomed to be killed in the days ahead by wounds and the terrible conditions. For the lucky survivors, it meant they were left stranded at 12,000 feet with only ice and snow in view. The survivors in the group were hopeful with the first emotions. They heard updates over the radio. They were hopeful about an operation to rescue them. However, after days began to turn into weeks, hope started to diminish. They heard through the radio that the search was off. Families and rescuers assumed no one could have survived these conditions for such a long time. Still, however, the survivors did not relinquish hope. Since more than 2 months now they are staying in icy temperatures and minimum resourcefulness. They were given only very minimal foods, some pieces of chocolate, wine, and small snacks they brought on board. Here, they were faced with a moral decision. All of their ration was consumed and no animal or vegetation surrounded them. Only option left with them would be to survive by eating the dead. This was one very tough decision, and most of the people could not even think to face such a situation. But human psychology differs in survival scenarios. World-renowned psychologists research survival cases just like these, and there is one theory that explains all this and is called survival psychology. That branch of psychology says that with life or death at risk, the human brain would be able to adapt into things that are simply unfathomable. There is the psychological warfare between the instinct of survival and the beliefs that are moral and cultural. Cannibalism is taboo in many cultures, but at times, the cultural conditioning is overcome by survival instincts, and the unthinkable decision is made. Survivor accounts are able to open up a glimpse into the meaning that this choice brought to their lives. Survivor Roberto Canessa later described it as a conflict between the need to survive and the instinctive culture that they belonged to. Each of them dealt with it in a different manner, and as much as they could, they gave glory to the fallen. To them, they were not abandoning their buddies. The sacrifices were what would help other people to live on. 2 survivors of the crash, Nando Paradu and Roberto Canessa, after 72 days of extreme hardship, trekked for 10 days through the Andes Mountain. Eventually, they discovered a Chilean shepherd that brought rescue to the surviving ones on December 20th, 1972. Only 16 of the 45 survived at the end of the day. This rescue would turn into an international story, with headlines and stay a case of profound case study for survival and human resilience. No wonder people were amazed at their survival. Many condemned them, but others praised for being strong and tenacious. Such an incident has been portrayed in documentaries, books, and even a feature film, Asterisk a live star. How the public perception of such survivors changed with time can be seen as people finally realized the horrific conditions that they had to survive through. For many years, scholars have been questioning how people could survive such conditions. Most attribute it to the willpower and bonding among the survivors that made them continue. Some relate it to extreme cold and starvation and the response in human physiology. This raises questions of human boundaries. How far will the body and mind of human go towards death, staring it right there? Asterisk survival, resilience, moral conflict. The survival narrative, resilience in such situation, and also the sense of moral conflict is expressed through the testimonies by survivors as a reminder to all us about how remarkably men can adapt and respond towards such a thing, with a question of what level that may be in search for survival. As much as we may wish none of us have to face such choices, these stories make us feel the strength and endurance of the human spirit that leads us to question every notion of survival. This is how the story of Flight 571 ends, a tragedy that made people face their limits with human endurance and those put up boundaries within the psyche that was set by them. Events like this make one realize the strength within but also pose an ethical question that we can never answer truthfully.